Aristotle Onassis had everything, except a soul. He was always a man of performances. The dark glasses, the monogrammed silk handkerchief, the impeccably tailored suits that made his small, compact body seem larger than it was. The world wanted to believe in the myth. The poor boy from Smyrna, turned exile, who built a glittering empire of tankers and yachts, who seduced divas and married a president's widow. To millions, he was Ari, the golden tycoon, the playboy who dined with princes and presidents, the swaggering pirate who conquered life itself. But beneath the mask was something else. Something darker, corrosive, merciless. Onassis himself once confessed it in a moment of candor. Villains always have the best parts. He knew he was not the hero of his own story. He preferred to be the monster, because the monster bends the world to his will. Those who circled closest to him felt it in their bones. Aides whispered of his sudden rages, the violence that simmered just beneath the surface. Women who loved him discovered the cruelty behind the charm. He could lift them to ecstasy, then grind them into humiliation, as if their suffering nourished his power. His children grew up in the shadow of his empire, poisoned by a father's domination. Rivals were destroyed with surgical precision, then mocked for their weakness. He was a man who could mourn the burning of Smyrna as a boy, then later use that trauma as fuel to exploit the miseries of others. He was a refugee who swore never to be powerless again, and so he built his fortune on shadows, war smuggling, shady deals, bribes, blackmail, political corruption. Every brick of his empire was laid with betrayal. Onassis did not merely live in the 20th century's corridors of wealth and power. He polluted them. He turned glamour into a weapon, money into chains, and intimacy into a battlefield. Behind the glossy photographs of Ari lounging on the deck of the Christina with Maria Callas or Jackie Kennedy, behind the champagne toasts and the glittering smiles, there was a cold, calculating hunger. A man who never forgot what it meant to be powerless, and who spent his life ensuring that no one around him would ever forget that he was not. This is not the Onassis of legend, not the tycoon who dazzled the tabloids, but a man hollowed out by rage, feeding on others to fill the void inside himself. This is Monster Onassis. Smyrna burned in his memory forever. As a boy, he had watched his city consumed by fire, the Christian quarter devoured in an inferno of hatred, the air filled with screams. His beloved uncle Alexander hanged by the Turks, his grandmother killed in the chaos, his father dragged to a concentration camp. Out of the ash, Aristotle Onassis carried a vow etched into his soul. Never again would he be powerless, never again would he kneel. He would climb, claw, and corrupt his way to safety. And if the world demanded a monster to survive, then a monster he would become. In Buenos Aires, the exile found himself one among thousands, Armenians, Greeks, Turks, refugees dismissed with contempt as Turcos. The tango capital glittered for the rich, but for the displaced, it was hunger, cold rooms, and humiliation. Onassis washed dishes, scrubbed laundry, begged for clerical work. He learned quickly that honesty was a currency no one respected. To survive, he would have to cheat, bluff, and bend every rule until it snapped. Even then, ambition dripped from him like oil. He cultivated an aura of dignity that set him apart from the other immigrants. He polished his shoes until they gleamed, slicked his hair with brilliantine, and stared at the world with heavy-lidded eyes that dared it to underestimate him. Women noticed the hunger, and sometimes mistook it for passion. He learned how to seduce not only for pleasure, but for advantage. If a night in a widow's bed gave him warmth, contacts, or a few pesos, it was a bargain he made without hesitation. At the Argentine telephone company, he discovered his greatest weapon, information. Night shifts at the switchboard gave him the chance to listen, to pry, to learn the rhythms of power. He eavesdropped on businessmen striking deals, on politicians whispering favors, on traders speculating in commodities. He wrote it all down. Knowledge was leverage, and leverage was the embryo of power. Soon he was dabbling in speculation, linseed oil, hides, anything he could manipulate through scraps of overheard intelligence. A few dollars multiplied into hundreds. It was not enough to live like a king, but enough to taste the intoxication of winning. He moved through Buenos Aires with two faces. By day, the polite young immigrant working at the exchange, modest, serious. By night, a chameleon in silk shirts and Italian shoes, haunting cafes, courting opera singers, joining elite rowing clubs where money whispered in every corner. At the Teatro Colón, he stalked Claudia Musio, the diva whose voice shook the city. He buried her in flowers until she took him to her bed. He bragged to friends that he had conquered a goddess. In truth, it was not passion he wanted. It was the doors she could open. He had discovered the cruel alchemy of his life. Every intimacy was an investment, every kiss a step upward, every betrayal just another coin in the bank. His first real scheme was tobacco. Argentina smoked dark Cuban leaf, too heavy for women, too bitter for the new generation. Onassis proposed importing the lighter Turkish tobacco his father still controlled in Greece. He spun dreams of a feminine cigarette craze, a product as fashionable as a Paris gown. He talked his way into offices, bullied his way past clerks, camped outside the homes of executives until they let him in. Most dismissed him as a lunatic, but persistence was his religion. Finally, Juan Gaona, the skeletal head of one of Argentina's largest tobacco firms, took pity, or perhaps curiosity, and listened. Onassis sold the pitch like a lover whispering into an ear, lighter, smoother, exotic, irresistible to women. Gaona ordered a shipment. Onassis cabled his father, demanding more stock. For weeks he walked the city with his chest swollen, certain he had struck gold. But the Argentine market was not ready. Women smoked in secret, in boudoir, not in public cafes. The orders dried up. Gaona cancelled. For most men, it would have been a humiliating failure. For Onassis, it was a revelation. If the world would not buy his dream, then he would build the dream himself. He borrowed recklessly, bribed shamelessly, and opened his own company, Aristotle Onassis, Oriental tobacco importer. He bought machinery, hired workers, and began rolling his own cigarettes with a contraband leaf. He forged bills of lading to secure loans far beyond his legal rights. He risked prison with every document he signed. But risk was ecstasy. The more he gambled, the more alive he felt. And in that crucible, the monster inside him sharpened its claws. He discovered that rules existed only to be corrupted, that men could be bribed, intimidated, or seduced into anything. He learned that women were as exploitable as markets, that pity was a weakness to be despised, that morality was the language of fools. Buenos Aires had given him his education. From the filth of immigrant boarding houses, Aristotle Onassis had begun to rise. By the 1930s, Aristotle Onassis was no longer just the ambitious immigrant at the switchboard. He had slipped into something far more dangerous, a manipulator of the hidden arteries of commerce. And as the storm clouds of war spread across Europe, Onassis sensed opportunity in blood and fire. The Depression ruined millions, but not him. While men jumped from windows on Wall Street, Onassis prowled docks and shipping offices, buying up aging vessels nobody wanted. Rusted hulls, condemned tankers, ships destined for the scrapyard. To Ari, they were gold. He knew that when war came, the world would beg for ships. He bought them with borrowed money, forged papers and bribes, registering them under whatever flag suited him. Panama, Liberia, Honduras, anywhere the law was weakest and the taxes lowest. He called it business. Others called it piracy. It was the birth of his empire, the fleet of ghost ships that would carry not only oil, but the secrets of his rise. Every vessel was a loophole, every deal a deception. He discovered that international law was a patchwork of contradictions, and he stitched those contradictions into his personal cloak of power. If one government taxed him, he moved his ships to another. If one country forbade arms or oil shipments, he forged manifests and sailed anyway. He was not bound by nations. He was bound only by profit, and profit he found in darkness. He smuggled tobacco during Prohibition, his ships carrying contraband cigarettes and liquor into ports hungry for vice. He cut deals with gangsters, winked at customs officials, spread bribes like seed corn. In Argentina, whispers followed him of links to mafia families who greased the wheels of his growing fleet. He cultivated friendships with politicians, generals, and intelligence agents. He knew how to flatter, how to bribe, how to seduce, and how to threaten. When the Second World War erupted, Onassis's moment arrived. Nations at war needed oil, tankers became lifelines, and Onassis had them. Old, patched, barely seaworthy hulks, but tankers nonetheless. He insured them for astronomical sums, then sent them into dangerous waters. If they survived, he collected shipping fees. If they sank, he collected insurance. Either way, he won. His captains cursed him, calling the voyages death sentences. Sailors muttered that they were pawns in a tycoon's gamble. Onassis shrugged. To him, men were expendable, steel and oil were not. In backrooms of New York and London, officials whispered about the Greek pirate profiteering off war. But governments, desperate for ships, tolerated him. They needed his tankers too much to stop him, and Onassis knew it. He played one power against another, feeding his fortune with their weakness. By the war's end, his fleet had multiplied, his pockets bulged, and his name carried both awe and disgust. Yet behind the façade of the successful tycoon lay rot. Onassis was not merely ruthless in business, he was cruel in spirit. He delighted in watching rivals collapse. He undercut contracts, spread rumors, used prostitutes and blackmail to trap competitors. He bribed officials to sabotage others' ships, then laughed as their fortunes sank. He spoke often of loyalty, but in truth he betrayed anyone when it suited him. To Onassis, betrayal was not shame. It was strategy. He even betrayed his own partners. In one notorious scheme, he conned the Saudi royal family with sweetheart oil deals, disguising his take in labyrinthine contracts. When discovered, he shrugged it off. To him, theft was not theft if it came wrapped in signatures and seals. Later, American intelligence would brand him a danger, a man whose web of oil and shipping threatened their grip on the Middle East. But by then, he was untouchable. Onassis thrived in corruption because he understood a truth others ignored, that governments, like men, had their price. Dictators, presidents, ministers, all could be bought if only you offered enough. He courted military juntas in Greece, wooed Nazi collaborators, then turned around and charmed American senators. His yacht, the Christina, became his stage, where champagne, prostitutes, and whispered deals flowed in equal measure. Behind the laughter, there was always the quiet scratch of his pen signing another contract that reeked of shadows. For Aristotle Onassis, love was never tenderness. It was a battlefield. Women were not companions. They were conquests, trophies, pawns in a relentless game of domination. If his tankers and contracts built his fortune, his women built his legend. And behind the legend, in the shadows where champagne turned to poison, lay humiliation, cruelty, and despair. He had discovered early that intimacy could be currency. In Buenos Aires, the widows and actresses who fell into his bed opened doors, whispered names, lent money. Their passion was simply another ledger entry in his rise. By the time he stepped onto the glittering stage of high society, Onassis had perfected the act. Charm them, dazzle them, then break them. He believed love was war, and war meant victory for him, defeat for the other. Maria Callas was his masterpiece of cruelty. When he met her, she was at the height of her power. She was La Divina, the world's greatest soprano, adored for a voice that seemed to tear open heaven itself. She had sung before presidents, filled the grand halls of La Scala and the Met with silence and rapture. She was married to the industrialist Giovanni Battista Meneghini, but her marriage was more arrangement than romance. In Onassis, she thought she saw passion. In truth, she had met her destroyer. Their affair began on the yacht Christina in 1959 during a glittering Mediterranean cruise. Callas, always self-conscious of her weight and looks, was flattered by Ari's attention. He courted her with champagne, laughter, and the aura of danger that surrounded him. He whispered promises of freedom, of leaving her dull marriage for a love that would consume them both. Callas believed him. She left her husband. She abandoned her career at its peak, cancelling engagements, withdrawing from the stage, devoting herself entirely to Ari. It was a sacrifice few could imagine. The world's most powerful voice, silenced for love. To Callas, he was everything. To Onassis, she was conquered territory. He began to mold her. He told her what to wear. He insisted she cut her hair short to please him. He demanded she dress in black, as though she were already in mourning for her independence. When friends asked why she had disappeared from the opera houses, she replied simply, "Aristotle wants me here." Soon, the humiliation began. He flaunted other women before her, inviting mistresses aboard the Christina while she sat nearby, forced to smile. He introduced her to courtesans as friends, then disappeared with them into his cabin. Callas would wait, heartbroken, until he emerged, shameless, ready to drink and laugh again. When she pleaded with him, he mocked her devotion. "Maria, you are like a little girl," he sneered, "so emotional, so dramatic." He reminded her that she had given up her career for him, that she was dependent now on his affection. To friends, she admitted, "I am quite simply at his mercy." Once, in a moment of cold candor, he described their relationship to others as pay as you go. For Callas, who had given him her voice, her marriage, her future, it was devastating. The cruelties multiplied. Onassis controlled her social life, dictating who she could see, who she could not. He encouraged her to undergo abortions, promising marriage afterward, promises he never kept. When she asked about their future, he dismissed her. "We will see, Maria. Life is long." Worst of all were the public humiliations. He flaunted Jackie Kennedy before her long before the marriage, boasting of his access to the world's most famous widow. At dinners, he would flirt openly with Jackie in front of Maria. Callas, who had given up her soul for him, was forced to watch the spectacle of her replacement in real time. By the late 1960s, Maria was a shadow. Her voice, once thunderous, trembled. She withdrew from the stage, ashamed, uncertain, broken. She confessed to friends that she no longer recognized herself. The diva, who had commanded silence from thousands, was reduced to tears by one man's contempt. When Onassis finally married Jackie Kennedy in 1968, Callas was devastated. She had believed until the end that he would marry her. Instead, she was discarded, her sacrifice mocked, her love treated as nothing more than another victory in Ari's long list of conquests. Even after marrying Jackie, Onassis returned to Callas for physical comfort, visiting her in Paris, demanding she accept the role of mistress to his marriage. And she did. Such was his power over her. He broke her voice, her pride, her spirit. And even then, he used her one last time. And then there was Jacqueline Kennedy. To the outside world, it looked like a fairy tale. The world's most famous widow stepping onto a private island in the Ionian Sea to marry the richest man alive. The flashbulbs blinded. The headlines screamed, "Camelot reborn on Skorpios." But for Jackie, and for those who knew the truth, it was not a love story. It was a contract, a bargain, a cage. By 1968, Jackie was exhausted. Since the assassination of John F. Kennedy 5 years earlier, she had lived under siege. Paparazzi hounded her every step, chasing her children into playgrounds, swarming her outside churches. She once told a friend, if they could, they would photograph us eating breakfast, sleeping, even breathing. She wanted escape, security, peace. Onassis knew it. He had courted her since 1963, just months after Dallas, with invitations to Skorpios and cruises on the Christina. She resisted, wary of his reputation. But as the years of grief stretched on, and the relentless pursuit of photographers worsened, she yielded. "He is the only man who can protect me," she confided. The negotiations began like a merger. Onassis demanded terms, lawyers drafted documents. Friends of Jackie later called it a marriage of sale. She secured a financial guarantee for herself and her children. He secured the most famous woman on earth. To Ari, it was the ultimate acquisition, proof that even America's sainted First Lady could be bought. The wedding was held on October 20th, 1968, on Skorpios, Onassis's private island. Paparazzi swarmed the waters in boats. To the cameras, Jackie looked poised, wrapped in white lace, walking into the chapel at his side. But within the island walls, the atmosphere was tense, even sordid. Maria Callas, still clinging to hope, had believed he would marry her. Instead, she was humiliated, cut off, forced to read of the ceremony in the newspapers. Onassis relished the scandal. He had not only married Jackie, he had humiliated Maria in the process. Even on the wedding day, Jackie saw signs of her new reality. The guest list was stacked with courtesans and mistresses disguised as friends. The whispers among staff carried fast. Ari had made no promises of fidelity. "She knows what she's marrying," one aide muttered. Jackie, ever disciplined, said nothing. The marriage was cold from the start. Jackie found herself not a partner, but an accessory. Onassis called her the widow in front of others, his voice dripping with contempt. At dinners, he mocked her silences, sneering that she had nothing to say except about clothes. When she retreated behind dignity, he laughed. He flaunted his affairs openly. Models and courtesans were flown to Skorpios and paraded at dinners. Jackie was forced to sit opposite them at the table, her face a mask, while the room buzzed with gossip. Ari enjoyed it, the spectacle of the American icon reduced to silence by his betrayals. His cruelty extended to her family. He pursued Lee Radziwill, Jackie's own sister, showering her with gifts, taking her on yacht cruises, even repeating the very gestures he had once used to seduce Maria Callas. Rumors spread that he had slept with Lee. Whether true or not, he ensured Jackie heard them. The humiliation was deliberate, calculated and constant. On Skorpios, Jackie often retreated to her rooms, avoiding Ari's late-night parties where liquor flowed and prostitutes entertained his friends. Staff whispered of her walking alone along the beaches at dawn, silent, withdrawn. In New York, she was more often seen without him than with him. They lived parallel lives, crossing only for public appearances. Onassis's words cut as deeply as his deeds. He dismissed her grief for JFK as American melodrama. When she attempted to exert influence in his affairs, he snapped, "You know nothing of business. Leave it to men." He told confidants that Jackie was beautiful furniture, a piece to be displayed, not engaged. He bragged to friends that marrying her was the biggest deal I ever made. To him, she was not a wife but a trophy, a way of proving that his money could reach even into the White House. He relished the envy of other men. Her suffering was part of the bargain. By the early 1970s, the marriage was a hollow performance. Jackie stayed for security. Ari stayed for the power her name gave him. They lived apart more often than together. He continued his affairs. She withdrew further into her children and her books. In his will, Onassis revealed the final cruelty. Jackie received only the legal minimum, $200,000 a year. Christina inherited billions. To the man who had demanded contracts before marriage, love had been nothing but a ledger. Even in death, he humiliated her, reducing her to a footnote in his empire. Maria and Jackie were only the most famous victims, but the pattern was everywhere. Onassis collected women the way others collected art, briefly admired, then discarded. He seduced socialites with gifts, then mocked them when they aged. He paraded courtesans on his yacht, then left them stranded in ports with nothing but cab fare. He bedded showgirls, secretaries, even call girls from Madame Claude's Paris salons, then bragged about it to his friends. He believed cruelty was proof of love. "All Greek men beat their women," he once told a friend. "He who loves well beats well." He was not speaking metaphorically. Women in his circle whispered of slaps, of bruises, of nights of rage. For Ari, domination was intimacy. Tenderness was weakness. He used gifts as traps. Diamonds one night, insults the next. A fur coat, then abandonment. He dangled promises of marriage, then ridiculed the women who believed him. Every relationship was a cycle of indulgence and humiliation. And always, he flaunted his betrayals. He enjoyed nothing more than watching two women who loved him collide. Maria forced to smile at Jackie, Jackie forced to endure Lee Radziwill, mistresses forced to dine together at his table. Their suffering amused him. Their humiliation was his sport. What united them all, Callas, Jackie, the mistresses, the socialites, was the way Onassis weaponized intimacy. He did not seek companionship, he sought submission. Maria Callas gave up her voice. Jackie Kennedy gave up her dignity. Countless others gave up their pride. All were consumed by the same monster, who measured his victories not in love, but in tears. For all his affairs, his marriages, his parades of mistresses, Aristotle Onassis only ever had two legitimate children, Alexander and Christina. To the world, they were heirs to a fortune, the golden boy and girl of a dynasty built on steel and oil. To Onassis himself, they were something else entirely, extensions of his will, mirrors of his ego, prisoners of his empire. He was not a father in the ordinary sense. He did not nurture, he did not guide, he commanded, he demanded. He measured his children's worth by how much they bent to him, how much they reflected his hunger, how much they bled for his ambitions. From their earliest years, Alexander and Christina learned that love in the Onassis household was conditional, a reward for obedience, withheld for defiance. Alexander was the golden child, handsome, intelligent, sensitive. He longed for freedom, for a life outside the shadow of his father's empire. He dreamed of flying, not ships, not oil, but airplanes. He became a pilot, a man of the skies, far removed from the grimy ballast of tankers. And in this, Onassis saw betrayal. A son who would rather fly above the sea than command the fleet upon it was to him an insult. Their relationship curdled into cruelty. Onassis mocked Alexander's passion, belittled his choices, reminded him constantly that he was weak, that he was wasting his life. He controlled him with money, dangled inheritance like a leash, and then yanked it back whenever Alexander resisted. Witnesses described dinners where Ari reduced his son to silence with sneers, nights where Alexander stormed out while his father laughed behind his glass. To Onassis, humiliation was discipline. To Alexander, it was suffocation. And yet, for all the cruelty, there was an obsession. Onassis could not let him go. He stalked his son's life, interfered with his loves, his friendships, his business ventures. He dangled approval like a drug, then withheld it. He loved Alexander only in the way a spider loves a fly caught in its web, possessively, destructively. The end came in 1973. Alexander, then 34, was flying his light aircraft when it crashed near Athens. Some said it was an accident, others whispered sabotage. What is certain is that Onassis never recovered. He had lost his only son, the child who bore his favorite uncle's name, the boy he had tortured and loved with equal cruelty. In the days after the crash, Onassis was seen pacing, raving, breaking into tears, then exploding into rage. He threatened lawsuits, blamed conspiracies, accused governments, cursed rivals. But beneath the fury was a hollow truth. He had destroyed the bond long before the plane went down. Christina fared no better. From girlhood, she was a pawn in her father's games. He lavished her with gifts, then withdrew affection. He mocked her weight, her lovers, her choices. He flaunted mistresses in front of her, letting her watch her mother humiliated again and again. He involved her in business, then excluded her, reminding her she was only a daughter, never an equal. As she grew older, Christina rebelled. She married rashly, divorced bitterly, drifted through men and fortunes, always searching for love, never finding it. Friends said she was haunted, brilliant, charming, but self-destructive, always sabotaging her own happiness. The world saw her as an heiress drowning in wealth. In truth, she was drowning in the shadow of her father's cruelty. Onassis treated her with the same mixture of obsession and contempt he had shown Alexander. He alternated between indulgence and punishment, between smothering her with control and abandoning her to despair. She was both his jewel and his scapegoat, adored one moment, scorned the next. In public, he boasted of her beauty, her sophistication. In private, he sneered at her failures, blamed her for disloyalty, accused her of weakness. The curse of Onassis was not poverty, it was power twisted into poison. His children inherited not only his fortune, but his darkness. Alexander's dreams ended in a wreckage of metal. Christina's life became a carousel of broken marriages and failed searches for happiness. Both bore the scars of a father who treated them not as souls to love, but as possessions to control. Even in grief, Onassis could not let go. He clung to Alexander's memory, speaking of him obsessively, raging at the world that had taken him. Some said he carried the guilt like a brand, that the loss of his son broke the monster at last. But those who knew him better said otherwise. Onassis did not weep for the son he had lost. He wept for the reflection of himself that was gone. His empire had devoured his children. The fortune that dazzled the world had become their prison. And in the end, the man who had sworn never to be powerless again had created the greatest powerlessness of all, the destruction of his own blood. Aristotle Onassis liked to present himself as a lone wolf, a self-made pirate who owed his empire to nothing but wit and will. The truth was far darker. His fortune was propped up by shadows, dictators, mafia dons, intelligence services, and corrupt politicians. He did not just swim in the murky waters of power, he built his kingdom upon them. From his earliest deals, he understood that the law was an obstacle to be purchased, not obeyed. To Onassis, ideology was irrelevant. Loyalty was irrelevant. The only question was, can you help me? If yes, he paid. If no, he crushed. The mafia admired him because he thought like they did. Rumors swirled of meetings with Lucky Luciano's men during the Prohibition years, of shipping liquor and contraband cigarettes across borders greased by mob cash. Later, as his empire expanded, whispers tied him to heroin smuggling routes hidden inside the belly of his tankers. Nothing was ever proven, Onassis made sure of that. But the rumors lingered like the smell of oil in a bilge. He cultivated them, because fear was currency too. He courted dictators with the same ruthless pragmatism. In Argentina, he charmed Juan and Evita Perón, making himself useful to their nationalist dreams while padding his accounts. In Greece, he greased the palms of generals who had strangled democracy, ensuring Olympic Airways remained in his grip. He whispered promises of prosperity, then siphoned profits abroad. For Onassis, serving tyrants was not shameful. It was efficient. Tyrants did not ask awkward questions. Tyrants signed papers. And then there was the CIA. Washington distrusted him, suspecting his Saudi oil intrigues, his proximity to shady Middle Eastern deals. In the 1950s, he made a play for Saudi crude, trying to wrest shipping rights from the Americans. It was a dangerous gamble. He bribed princes, seduced intermediaries, and boasted of owning the very arteries of the oil trade. When the scheme was uncovered, US intelligence branded him a threat. But he survived, as always, by weaving a web of half-truths and favors. Politicians who denounced him one year were guests on his yacht the next. The Christina was not merely a playground, it was a floating embassy of corruption. Mafia bosses dined beside senators, dictators sipped champagne beside film stars. Prostitutes were paraded as companions, then used as tools of blackmail. Deals were signed between courses of lobster. Secrets were traded as casually as cigars. Onassis knew the value of atmosphere, candlelight, music, liquor, the perfect camouflage for treachery. He collected allies not out of friendship, but out of necessity. A king here, a prince there, a mobster in Naples, a colonel in Athens. He bought them all, played them all, betrayed them all. If one fell, he shifted to another. His loyalty was to power itself, not to the men who held it. But shadows are never free. The mafia expected favors. Dictators demanded allegiance. Intelligence agencies kept files. Onassis balanced them all with the skill of a juggler, but the act took its toll. Paranoia became his companion. He saw spies in waiters, rivals in every businessman, traitors in his own family. He hired private detectives to shadow Christina, to watch Alexander, to monitor mistresses. He trusted no one, because he himself was untrustworthy. In the end, his empire rested not on tankers or contracts, but on fear. Fear of what he knew, fear of what he might do, fear of what secrets he held. He thrived in the company of darkness, because he was darkness himself. Those who shared his table often left with their pockets heavier and their souls lighter. They knew, as he knew, that once you entered Onassis's world, you never left clean. You left compromised, entangled, forever linked to the shadow of a man who built his fortune not in daylight, but in the alleys where monsters rule. If there was one constant in Aristotle Onassis's life, it was hatred. It burned in him like fuel, sharper than ambition, more intoxicating than love. He was not content to succeed. He needed to see his enemies ruined, humiliated, ground into dust beneath his heel. Wealth alone could not satisfy him. Only revenge could. His greatest vendetta was against Stavros Niarchos, his fellow Greek shipping magnate, his rival in both business and blood. Niarchos was tall, elegant, aristocratic, where Onassis was squat, brash, and vulgar. The world compared them endlessly, and Onassis could not bear it. Niarchos married into the same Livanos dynasty that Onassis had, binding the two men in a poisonous knot of family and rivalry. When Niarchos seduced and later married Onassis's ex-wife, Tina, the hatred metastasized into obsession. Onassis never forgave. He never forgot. He stalked Niarchos across boardrooms and ballrooms, leaking scandals, undercutting contracts, bribing ministers to favor his own bids. He treated every deal as a battlefield, every dinner as a duel. Guests at his yacht remembered how the mere mention of Niarchos's name could turn Ari's face dark, his voice guttural, his mood foul. Once, at the height of his fury, he left a room so violently that doors splintered. The hatred was not just professional, it was personal, raw, primal, and Niarchos was only one of many. Onassis collected enemies the way other men collected art. He relished feuds. He insulted partners, betrayed allies, mocked rivals. He carried grudges across decades, nursing them like treasures. An insult in 1940 could still provoke a rant in 1970. To Onassis, hatred was a form of memory, a way of ensuring the world never erased the slights against him. He once quoted the ancient poet Theonis, "Know of my hatred and my violence, and know in your heart that for your offense I shall avenge myself as I can." It was more than rhetoric. It was creed. He avenged in boardrooms with ruthless contracts, in bedrooms with seductions of rivals' wives, in politics with bribes that turned ministers into weapons. He believed no offense could go unanswered. Even within his own family, hatred fermented. He resented his father, Socrates, for weakness during Smyrna. He mocked his siblings, belittled his daughter, raged against his son. He turned even the intimacy of family into a theatre for grudges. To love Onassis was to risk his scorn. To cross him was to invite his revenge. His hatreds extended beyond individuals to nations. He despised America for trying to block his oil schemes, mocked their politicians as hypocrites, called their laws a joke. He raged against the British for their colonial arrogance, even as he dined with their lords. He sneered at Greeks who called him a traitor, who accused him of selling out to dictators. Every insult was stored, every slight remembered, every enemy added to the ledger of vengeance. Hatred was the rhythm of his life. In victory he gloated, in defeat he plotted. He could never forgive, because forgiveness meant surrender. And Aristotle Onassis surrendered nothing. He wore his grudges like armor, carried them like talismans, brandished them like swords. It hollowed him, of course. Those who knew him in later years saw the toll, the bitterness in his voice, the paranoia in his eyes, the way every conversation curved back to some old betrayal, some ancient enemy. The empire he had built could not silence the gnawing rage inside him. Stavros Niarchos outlived him, richer in the end, calmer, more respected. That fact would have driven Ari mad. But in truth, it hardly mattered. For Onassis, wealth was never the real prize. The real prize was revenge. And when revenge failed him, when hatred was all that remained, he was left with the truest reflection of his soul, a heart blackened, swollen, and empty. His decline was not sudden. It was slow, humiliating, poisoned by illness, grief, paranoia, and rage. The man who had terrified boardrooms and broken the strongest women of his age died muttering about curses, abandoned by love, consumed by his own darkness. The unraveling began on January 23, 1973, the day of his son's death. In his rages, he blamed Jackie. He whispered to friends that she was cursed. "Death follows her," he spat. "Kennedy, her child, her husband, all dead. And now my boy. She carries it with her like a shadow." Some staff recalled him saying that if Jackie had never entered his life, Alexander would still be alive. To others, he sneered that she was the widow twice over, a woman tainted by tragedy who had brought ruin into his house. Jackie, already cold and distant in the marriage, was shattered by the accusation. But Ari did not stop. His paranoia needed a scapegoat, and Jackie was close enough to wound. He muttered often about her black luck, as though her very presence had cursed his family line. As if grief was not enough, his body began to collapse. Myasthenia gravis, a wasting neuromuscular disease, left him weak, trembling, his once swaggering gait reduced to a shuffle. He coughed uncontrollably, battled pneumonia, and endured endless hospitalizations in Paris. Nurses remembered him screaming at them, demanding miracle cures, cursing doctors for not reviving him. The tycoon who had lived by virility and excess now lived by injections and oxygen masks. He wore tailored suits to disguise his shrinking frame, dark glasses to hide hollow eyes. To visitors, he pretended to still be Ari the Conqueror. But behind closed doors, he was a frail old man pacing hallways, muttering about conspiracies. With Alexander dead, Christina became his heir. But their relationship, always turbulent, curdled into venom. He belittled her choices, mocked her failed marriages, sneered at her attempts at independence. She blamed him for Alexander's death, shouting that he had driven her brother to despair with his endless humiliations. Their arguments were volcanic. Staff recalled hearing Christina's voice echo through Skorpios, screaming, "You killed him!" While Ari raged back that she was unfit to carry his empire. He hired detectives to follow her, certain she conspired with Jackie to cheat him. He told friends Christina was weak, that she lacked the steel of an Onassis. But in truth, she was the last thread tying him to family, and it was unraveling. Even as his health failed, Ari could not resist tormenting Jackie. He flaunted mistresses in front of her, entertained prostitutes on the Christina, while Jackie withdrew in icy silence. He accused her of conspiring with Christina. He ordered investigators to track her movements in New York. And above all, he repeated the accusation that she was cursed, that her bad luck had killed his son. He told intimates that Jackie carried death in her aura, that everyone who touched her ended in a coffin. To Ari, it explained everything. The assassinations, the tragedies, the plane crash. Jackie was the black star at the center of it all. For Jackie, the marriage became intolerable. She retreated further into her own world, shielding her children, avoiding Ari's parties, escaping Skorpios whenever possible. The glamorous marriage of the century had dissolved into silence, suspicion, and contempt. The island of Skorpios, once the site of dazzling parties, degenerated into a mausoleum. Staff described Ari wandering alone on its beaches, chain-smoking, staring at Alexander's shrine. He ordered lights kept burning in his son's rooms, forbade anyone from touching his belongings. At night, he prowled the villa, muttering names, reliving old betrayals, cursing enemies long dead. Guests who once had flocked to his yacht now avoided him. He had become a ghost of himself, bitter, paranoid, dangerous in his rages. "He is like a lion in a cage," one friend observed, "but the cage is his own body." By early 1975, Onassis was confined to American hospital in Neuilly near Paris. Tubes ran into his arms, his body wasted, his lungs failing. Jackie visited briefly, cool, detached. Christina sat at his bedside, torn between pity and rage. He alternated between weeping and cursing, demanding to know why the world had betrayed him. On March 15, 1975, Aristotle Onassis died at 74. The tycoon who had once ruled oceans and women alike ended powerless, frail, surrounded not by love, but by resentment and fear. His will dealt one final cruelty. Jackie received only the minimum Greek law required, $200,000 a year. Christina inherited billions. The empire he had built collapsed within years, fractured by lawsuits and Christina's struggles. His name, once feared, became a cautionary tale. He had built a fortune greater than kings. He had seduced the most famous women alive. He had terrified rivals, bribed governments, and humiliated friends. But in the end, the empire was ashes, his family destroyed, his body broken, his mind consumed by paranoia. The monster who had broken everyone else finally consumed himself. When the news of Aristotle Onassis' death spread, the world mourned a legend. Newspapers printed the photographs, the dark glasses, the yacht, the opera diva, the first lady. They wrote of the refugee boy who became a billionaire, the tycoon who seduced Jackie Kennedy, the pirate who turned oil into gold. To the public, he was a rags-to-riches fairy tale, a glamorous rogue who played by his own rules and won. But those who had known him, truly known him, whispered a different story. They remembered the cruelty, the betrayals, the destruction he left in his wake. They remembered Maria Callas, humiliated and broken. They remembered Jackie, trapped in a gilded cage. They remembered Alexander, dead in the wreckage of his plane, and Christina adrift in sorrow. They remembered the sailors who cursed his name as they sailed on death-trapped tankers, the rivals ruined by his treachery, the dictators and mobsters who dined with him in the shadows of his yacht. His fortune survived him, but his legacy was poison. Christina inherited his billions, but not his strength. Within a decade, she too was gone, her life consumed by depression and despair. The empire fractured, scattered into trusts and foundations. The Onassis dynasty, which Ari had imagined eternal, ended in ashes. His name endured but hollow, stripped of heirs, stripped of love. And yet the myth persists. Tourists still whisper of the Christina. Tabloids still print his photographs. Documentaries still repeat the tale of the penniless refugee who rose to become the richest man alive. The glamour endures because the darkness was hidden. Few want to look too closely at the rot beneath the gold. But when the masks fall, the truth remains. Onassis was not a titan of progress, not a genius of industry, not a hero of survival. He was a man hollowed by hatred, driven by revenge, corrupted by power. He built his empire not on vision but on exploitation. He destroyed those who loved him, and in the end, destroyed himself. The world will remember the tycoon, but history, if it is honest, will remember the monster.